You meet someone for the first time, you get a good, energetic about them. That is the one that I feel the most connected to, and I think is foundational, that we can each tap into. But like you say, it's kind of our modern conventional society that, through all the reasons we could go through and all the kind of historical references, that has really been, phased out, trained out, or, seen as like, oh, well, something's wrong with that person. Or, how many people do we have in psych institutes that are actually fine? They just have these gating channels that are really open in one way or another. Misunderstood, yeah. Welcome to the Light Cellar podcast, brought to you by Light Cellar, a place where you can learn to find and craft your own food and medicine. In this interview series, you will meet a range of characters in the health and wellness space that are bringing light to your everyday. You'll hear from a number of different experts on a wide variety of topics. We have several different series within the podcast, including our Wild Wisdom and Storytelling with Blaine Andrusek, the Rays of Light, inspiring wellness in the community, plus solo casts, Q&As, and other topics for you to enjoy. You can find this as a video version, as well as the audio on any of your favorite platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this with somebody you know who will benefit. You can also shop online at lightcellar.ca. Hello. Welcome. Another edition of Wild Wisdom and Herbal Storytelling with Herbal Elder Blaine Andrusek. We've been doing this, it's not quite a year. It's going to be coming up. I don't know, I can't remember. When did we start doing this?
I have no idea. My brain and time, since my crash, that 3 years of my life have gone by since I had my, whatever we want to call that, my breakdown.
Yeah.
It astounds me. But I've been quite just amazed with, I was bringing this up in the car, occasionally looking something up that I forget or whatever about a plant, and getting into various websites where there'll be like 80 pages of data,
right?
Like hardcore, not the sort of stuff, like you can go online and look up a plant and get all sorts of companies selling product and have uses that aren't even appropriate and that sort of thing. There's lots of bad information online. I think everybody out there would agree with me. You have to fish through it. But I'm talking about, technical resources from major, some of it pharmaceutical companies themselves, but just about how many, we use that word, phytochemicals are in an apple.
Mm-hmm.
And
once you break it down,
some of them are very toxic,
right?
And if it got me thinking about how, with the problems we've been having with the government, and they may cite data about how a particular herb is poisonous because it contains.
Right.
Well, have you looked at celery lately? You know what I mean? Plants are really complex.
Maybe the most common that people would recognize, like an apple, is like cyanide in the seeds, right? And apricot kernels, and there's various levels in each of them. But our food is deep. It is complex.
And some of that we've known for a while, right? And it's, I think the reason for the chemicals, like when you brought up the apricots, is that that's part of their defense system.
Right.
They want fruit, like all plants have some way of spreading their seed. It's a way of looking at a child and saying, well, go west, young man, or, whatever.
Yeah.
So, dandelions build kites, and maple trees build those little things that look like helicopters. Are called samaras.
Yeah.
Some plants just spread by root division. They don't even flower, or all of the above. But the engineering, like just talking about Balm of Gilead,
right?
Working on the notes for this upcoming class. The amount of engineering it takes to make a leaf,
the
structure involved, is really incredible. And our growing season is so short that if plants had to start from scratch building a leaf, it'd probably take them 3 years.
Right.
So it's important that next year's buds, spring buds, are already on the trees right now.
Yeah, they can utilize that solar energy, middle of the sun, and start to create what they'll need for a time where there's less, resources in their case.
And as soon as it's warm enough, they just explode, and there's a leaf there.
Yeah, yeah.
This.
One of the ones that I've heard that actually still even grows even in the middle of the winter, just ever so small and slightly, is the Shepherdea canadensis, the buffalo berry, the soap berry, like the little tips, of the leaves. I've heard Robert Rogers say that even in the depths of winter, they're still just ever so slightly growing.
Ready to go.
Ready to go. Yeah. Yeah, and that chemistry. Another thing that you had mentioned, it reminded me something that Yarrow had said. We hosted him for a webinar, and he was, his whole theme was like spring cleansing, and of course he got onto dandelions, and he was talking about that connection that you get as a herbalist, to the plant. And maybe we can take this a couple different directions. Number one, you're going to get more from the plant, when you have that intimate personal relationship with it, engaging with the plant. And I know there's been other studies and other herbalists that have talked about how the chemistry of a plant will change in response to, another being that it's interacting with, be it an animal, be it, obviously we're animals too, humans, come from intention. There's this idea of like, gorillas putting a piece of a leaf in their mouth and the chemistry of the plant changing in response to their saliva, or the old Anastasia, I'm going to plant a seed, but first I'll put it in my mouth and, give it information about myself. And as it, germinates and grows, it responds to that. So that, number one, and then number two, he was talking about too that, the chemistry of dandelion changes throughout the season. So, what it's like in the spring is going to have, subtle, but also, profound differences in its chemistry than it will, spring, summer, autumn, that type of thing. Like it's constantly changing and evolving, which makes sense because it's responding to the environment. They're responding to all kinds of stimuli. And as you mentioned, like, plants are incredible complex chemical factories, and it's one of their ways of how they communicate. It's one of their ways of how they defend themselves. Like us as animals, we have locomotion, we have speech, we have all kinds of tools at our disposal that plants are different, and that's just how they're hardwired and what's in their nature. What do you think about those two thoughts?
Well, my point is that I've worked with plants my whole life, really. And now I feel like I don't know anything. After seeing
you're a true master now. Yes.
Well, now I feel like a puppy again.
Yeah.
It's like there's just so much data coming out.
Right. No, for sure.
About the plants, and
yeah, which is fun and it's interesting and it can really spur on inspiration. It satisfies that intellectual, drive that many of us humans have. And yet still, the plants will still serve you. They'll still work, whether you know about all that or not.
Yes.
It's that old saying, like the herbs don't work unless you take them.
Yes.
And for sure, there's definitely an element of, placebo when when you've got that conviction, when you've got that cognitive assurance of, yes, this is it. I think it's going to help play out in kind of a placebo type way, just one's own strength and belief in it. They say the placebo effect can sometimes be 50-60% or more, depending on what it is, a part of the response. But regardless, whether you don't know about that, the plants still work in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that popped into my head halfway, was it feverfew that came on real big for headaches 20 years ago?
Oh.
Is that feverfew?
I believe so, yeah.
And so we had a couple of different universities, full-on major universities without, I don't remember the names, but the most highly regarded universities, both here and in England and whatever, were doing major studies over how or why does this work.
Right.
And some of the studies that happened proved beyond any doubt whatsoever that this stuff just rocks for migraine headaches. And then another study showed that this doesn't do anything for headaches.
Wow.
Right? And it took quite a long time before anybody figured out that the compounds that work so well for headaches are something that the plant uses for weather protection.
Oh, interesting.
Okay?
Yeah.
So some of the tests were done in California,
right,
where it never gets cold enough overnight, and the chemical didn't even really exist. But studies that were done, say, in England, where it would be darn near a damp frost at night.
Wow.
So in a place like Calgary, having some growing in my garden, I mean, it was still blooming in October.
Right.
And that's when you would harvest it, not in July.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
You know, and so, yeah, there's just, but every plant out there there's so much to get to know, right?
Yeah. And that's the trouble with, I mean, I guess the world, life, reality, but, you know, especially when it comes to science, when you start looking at certain studies. I mean, you know, you gave an example. It's like you can find just about anything to support anything, even, you know, contradictory, right? It helps with headaches, doesn't help with headaches. And, you know, science really takes getting into the weeds of, okay, what was going on? What was that one variable? Because that's the idea. You can only change one variable at a time.
Yeah. And in so many cultures, before we had computers and HPLCs and everything else that we use today, it was always whether you were making wine or soup or something medicinal, it would always be one of the elders that would come up and crush a leaf and sniff it and taste it and just say, no, it's not going to work. Like they didn't know how or why in detail.
Yeah.
They just knew.
Right.
They had worked with it enough to know they were relying on, like you said, just the taste or whatever.
Yeah, which is why, you know, as the path of being a herbalist, being your own herbalist, whether it's just for you and your family or whether you are pursuing that as a career to help others, it's so important to have, you know, both types of knowledge, you know, like the experiential, the tasting, the smelling, the connecting with the plants, the growing with the plants, making the medicine, you know, that oral tradition, learning from elders, that type of thing, as well as, you know, the book learning, the book knowledge. And I see today, you know, it's too much emphasis on, you know, the book learning and the book knowledge, which is great. It's key. It's essential. But we have to balance it with that experiential knowledge and knowing, you know, field experience.
And some of, like the pharmaceutical world would certainly take a crop apart, samples from this year's crop apart, to ensure they had the right percentage of a particular chemical in their compound, right? Like I was reviewing, because I haven't for years, the whole story about methyl salicylate and salicin in general, and all of that. So I think we've already brought up that salicin was first rather discovered from indigenous people, not just here, but in other countries as well. And so the genus, when Linnaeus was naming things, willows were called salix. And from that word, we found particular acids like salicin.
Right.
And, you know, when I started teaching herbology, I thought there was just somebody named Dr. Bayer, who was a German chemist. Well, no, it's a huge corporation, you know, like it's a massive, massive corporation.
Yeah.
And he got interested in, like, because we've got lots of different unrelated plants in Alberta that we could say form, loosely using the word, organic aspirin, right? And salicin in particular, at high doses, is really hard on the stomach lining.
Right.
Right? So he was looking at some of the other plants that, I may have mentioned this, but I was astounded when, like, I haven't been off Turtle Island, this place we live, much at all in my life. I had one very nice trip to France, and it astounded me that my first day in France, just to get over jet lag, I went for a walk in the nearby woods to the hostels there are called Gites. It's called a Gite. And I just headed out for a walk, and I felt like I was in Kananaskis country.
Yeah.
Except, there's an olive tree or a walnut tree.
Wouldn't that be nice, hey?
You know, a few things that we just don't have because of the temperature, right?
Yeah.
But there's so many things that grow there, same as here. So meadowsweet, which is a type of spirea, contains methyl salicylate and salicin, and it really captured some researcher. I don't know if it started with a man actually named Dr. Bayer or not, but he got into studying meadowsweet because it's good for the stomach.
Right.
Like that was one of the most important ingredients in one of Terry's products called ST for stomach tonic.
Right, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's several different chemicals in there that help the stomach with all sorts of different problems. And so that became his model because it had salicin, but in a form with other chemicals that were actually good for the stomach.
Yeah.
That's what got his curiosity going. And when he could finally synthesize a type of salicin that wasn't hard on the stomach. That was his whole mission.
Right.
So because it came from a spirea, I'm more than suspicious that when they finally got it and got a patent in, I think it was 19... I'm forgetting, but it was just a few years before World War I.
Yeah.
And they got an actual patent for aspirea. See?
Right.
It's got to have why the name was aspirin.
Yeah.
And that has to have something to do with how Germany was doing. Like there was a lot of taking over landscape before it actually turned into World War I, right? You know, they were raiding all sorts of areas over there. But anybody else after, let's just call it a hard day's work, was in pain. But German troops could take a little white pill and keep marching.
Right.
So that little pill, which came from a plant, initially had a lot to do, perhaps, or I believe, with how invincible they were in comparison to some of the other countries.
Cool.
They didn't have aspirin yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it really speaks to two things, you know, like one is this idea of like full plant chemistry, you know, just because we find, you know, one compound has some sort of effect, there's often a synergy, you know, behind that, you know, like a symphony in that sense. Like, sure, the violin can sound great by itself and, you know, stir emotions, but it's everything behind it that really causes the effect, right?
Yeah,
And
so when you look at HPLCs or any of the other tests that we do, you look at there's all these little peaks there, and this is the one we want here.
Right.
Can we synthesize that? So we make valerian into Valium.
Right.
But what about all these little guys that are doing things too, like perhaps being buffers?
Right.
And when you take one chemical out and make it pure, like you said, orchestra, all of those little people aren't there, and that's why we end up with side effects.
Yeah.
You know, so herbs didn't necessarily work better in terms of strength or predictability. In our culture, that people who dispense drugs are pharmacists, and they, because of their training, know a lot more about the drugs than the doctors do.
Right.
Because doctors only get so much time to study drugs, just like they have almost no time to study nutrition. So if you want to know about nutrition, like people, I am sympathetic totally towards medical doctors in our culture, because the expression, well, I asked my doctor and she should know. I agree. But she only went to school for 8 years,
Yeah.
And that was 14 years ago.
Yeah.
And depending on her interests, she might not have learned anything since. You know, it's kind of a
Yeah.
strange thing where we give them people who know nothing about their bodies and think they can do whatever they want in terms of lifestyle and diet and whatnot, think their doctor should just fix them now.
Right.
You know, when they get a disorder. But that's not fair. You know? So I've never been, you know, thinking like doctors are evil people or whatever. We need them.
Mm-hmm.
But we need us too.
Yeah, we got to play.
You know, to do the plant things. And one of the hardest things to get across to most medical doctors is vibrational healing.
Right.
Like flower essences and homeopathics and things like that.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible for a pharmacist to be convinced that this gets stronger the more you dilute it.
Right. They're just so embedded in kind of
It just
chemistry.
It makes no chemistry sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
You know, so but we had even when we lived in teepees around here, there were specialists within a tribe.
Right. Yeah,
You
naturally.
know, there were hunters that were better than others,
Mm-hmm.
and the gatherers, which were usually women.
Yeah.
If you were one of the best gatherers in a hunter-gatherer society, just being out there brushing against plants all day, picking berries or whatever, a lot of the chemicals, things like essential oils in particular, that are in the leaves brushing against you
Right.
would almost make you disappear scent-wise.
Right.
And so subtle hormones and things like that. We have all these, now I'm drifting into some of the aroma chemistry and things like how and why is it that you put 200 girls in a boarding school and within 6 months they're all having their period the same week, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And most men don't realize we have periods too. And we go through something called menopause.
Right.
And a lot of the problems that we have, boy, I'm on a tangent now, difficulties that come up, you may work with somebody of the opposite sex very closely, like we're this close at our desks and peeking through microscopes all the time,
Yeah.
stuff like that might make a male and female closer biochemically
Right.
than she is to her husband.
Right.
Which can create jealousy and other problems socially, right? So there's a lot going on
Yeah.
with all that subtle stuff.
Actually, what's really neat too is as you described, you know, people living in teepees and everybody having a role. Like that's kind of like the plant chemistry as well, right? There might be the one that's the really good hunter, i.e., you know, this particular chemical, but you know, that hunter, you know, like he's dependent, he's interdependent on the tribe, right? For his own success, survival. Like everybody's got a role in that community. And that is the same with plant chemistry within an individual plant, but also an ecosystem. Yeah.
So a lot of advanced gardeners know that some plants just shouldn't be planted side by side in your garden.
Right.
Because they won't do well. Or in other cases, there'll be plants that because of their phytochemicals will protect half of your garden
Right.
from insect pests.
Yeah.
So they're the bug spray without any bug spray.
Right. So, you know, that works on that level of the outer train in our communities, but also internally as well. And now I'm thinking about, okay, the synergy not only within particular plants and their chemistry, but also the combination of plants. And maybe, you know, a really great example a lot of people would understand is ayahuasca, right? It takes a combination of two, you know, different aspects from different trees to, you know, create what it creates. It's no single compound in one, it's a combination of the two. Or another great example is a lot of people are like, okay, you know, turmeric, the anti-inflammatory, you can get the curcumin that's separated out, use that as effective as just, you know, straight turmeric. Or if you do want the curcumin as an extract, you take it with, you know, a full spectrum turmeric to support that. But the idea of like, you know, black pepper and the piperine, you know, how it makes it more effective, like,
Yes.
you know, looking to ancient cultures that they intuited that. Somehow they knew, okay, turmeric, black pepper. I mean, Ayurveda just as the, you know, the alchemy, you know, the synergy of herbs and spices.
And it came out in the food because of the way I've watched people, actual Indians cooking real Indian dishes, and there's an order to things where you start out with some of the herbs just in oil,
Right.
and you don't add the next one until you can hear the seeds cracking,
Right.
because that's when certain flavors for the kitchen, but that's also why, it gets into Ayurvedic cooking, where different cultures got away with certain things where other cultures didn't.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about Indian food or Lithuanian food or Eskimo food or whatever, things were done a certain way, and we just got used to the taste.
Right.
Most people, I bring it up a lot with people I meet in the home, most people don't know why you would put mustard on a hot dog.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't know it's there to stimulate your parietal cells.
Yeah.
And then if you don't have any mustard, you won't digest it as well. How many people actually know that?
Yeah.
Like we're,
Yeah.
man, as a species, we are really stupid. We're dumb. We're just, well, that's insulting. But I guess that's why we have to go to other people for advice.
Yeah, and really treasuring that cultural wisdom. I was just down south in LA, went to a trade show, haven't been in a number of years, and I actually really like LA for just all the kind of like cultural pieces, like the galleries, the museums, and so we went to one this time that was called the Museum of Jurassic Technology. And don't try and think about the name and dissect. Okay, what in fact are they showcasing here? Museum of Jurassic Technology. It's a private collection. It's very small. It's just located in a house, kind of like downtown LA. And it is so like bizarre and curious and interesting. And one of the exhibits that really fascinated me, it was a showcase of what they call, vulgar knowledge, or folk wisdom. And to start off the exhibit, they kind of highlight the idea of Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin. And he got his original idea and inspiration, and we could take 10, 15 other examples, I'm sure you have more as well, where he was looking at, traditional peoples, like it was vulgar knowledge, like common wisdom, to take, the mold and apply it to, topically, right? So that little like
Egyptians were doing that.
Right? Yeah.
Using moldy bread on infected wounds, battle wounds. Yeah.
Yeah. And
They didn't know about penicillin,
right?
But they had it.
Yeah, right. And so it took Alexander Fleming going, okay, well, why are people doing this? And what's going on here? And then, led to that discovery. So then you went through the whole rest of that specific exhibit, with all these other, folk traditions. And it really raised the question of like, is there something of substance here? Like the mustard on hot dogs.
Sticking with him, like he wasn't, his career didn't start. He didn't go to school to become anything medicinal.
Right.
His job was to keep wine from going off.
Ah, yeah.
And that's where, he was studying different bacteria, and then one led to another.
Yeah.
And he's the one that left us, and we still, to a point, teach germ theory.
Right.
He brought us the microbe, and yet in his own career, by the end of it, I've read direct quotes, supposedly, where by the end of his, knowing that he had started this whole pathway in medicine that we get sick because of microbes, he himself is quoted as saying, wait, the microbe isn't everything. The terrain in somebody's body is part of it.
Right.
That's why when there's a flu going around the office, maybe a third of the staff get sick.
Yeah.
And the rest of the people don't.
Yeah.
Because their bodies are different. And
Right.
that brings us to today. We're learning more and more about microbiomes and all of these things that,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's interesting, though, if you think about it, the flip side. Okay, let's take penicillin as an example. Like you can take a microbe, some sort of like fungal species, and it can have a remedial effect on, the whole body or an illness or something like, topically. That speaks to the microbe having some sort of, I don't want to call it power, but sure, curative effect. So it can be either side. And yeah, I get conflicted a lot about that. I know there's a huge ton of debate of, germ theory versus terrain theory. I see both sides. I really do.
Yeah, we
see,
get
like,
those words in vitro or in vivo.
Right.
Stuff that might work in a petri dish but it doesn't do anything when you take it.
Right.
So they have to culture it both ways before they can make a medical claim
Right.
about something.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was fascinating because there were certain things that, like that phrase "hair of the dog," right? Well, apparently, I know we often apply that to, like, okay, you're drunk, just have a little bit of, or hungover rather, like hair of the dog, that'll cure you.
No, that'll just keep you drunk.
In that exhibit, they said, okay, well, that was a belief that if you got bit by a dog, you would take a hair of that dog and put it on the wound, and that would kind of make things all good, all right. And there were so many other really fascinating examples, some of which you're like, okay, that surely seems like there's nothing to that. That seems very superstitious. But I mean, it was to make you think, okay, like, out of this we got penicillin, one of the, arguably what people say one of the greatest, inventions in modern medicine, has its roots in, folk wisdom. People knew, and it took that kind of extrapolation. You never would have got there without that common knowledge. And I guess I'm just emphasizing it to, again, like we talk about, two ways of knowing, being a herbalist, experiential, oral tradition, folk wisdom is incredibly valid and important, as well as, the scientific side.
I just, something to do with what you said there got me thinking about witches flying on brooms.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So there's some of the herbs that we use might be too toxic to be absorbed through the stomach lining, but they would make what's called a bolus, I think.
Right.
And insert it rectally, or in some cases vaginally. So we dropped by to visit the pet witch in our valley, and she's sitting there. There was something she had to do. Well, in the old days, royalty for sure all had their pet witches because they needed people who could see somehow what the enemy was doing.
Right, yeah.
So the witch could do that. Normal people didn't have that. But part of how that worked for them was they were using entheogens, is the word that psychedelics. If you're on something like LSD, you have visions, but you have no idea where you actually are. Where entheogens is a different word, like ayahuasca you brought up. You can definitely have all sorts of visions, but at no point do you forget that you're in this room with Malcolm and Blaine,
right.
And you're sort of half, there you can still hear the guitar playing in the corner. And, so it's just a slight different division there. But anyway, the witch had to do some work for the king, and so she's just finished cramming a bunch of the bolus of this herb that it would be poison if she took it orally, but in order to get the visions, you need so much herb. So she's crammed it up her backside, and then just gone into the state where she's sitting beside her kitchen table. She was seeing, she was flying in her head, but somebody discovering her there, in trembling and with her eyes all rolled back in her head. She was flying all right, and the broom was still, she just dropped it when she started getting off on the herb. So witches flying on brooms came from being a seer.
Yeah.
And now it's something we do at Halloween.
Right. Yeah.
So incredible how history falls together there. And when I was talking about the hunter-gatherer thing with, if, let's call her Morning Sun, was a better gatherer than most of the females in her, I almost said, group, in her band, in her tribe, all of the intermingling with the plants disguised her of her own pheromones.
Right.
So females give off pheromones that say, take me now. Like how many times a little girl grows up and will get to ovulate is predetermined before she's even born. Just like how many seeds will end up in the core of an apple is predetermined before the flower even opens.
Right.
These things are predetermined, right? So then hormones come along and say, well, girlie, it's time to play cards. And you get this hormone drip that affects you to have your cycle. And eventually you run out of cards, and it might be the same voice saying, well, girlie, game over, and you go into menopause, right?
Yeah.
But if morning sun was putting out the pheromones that say, take me now, and her own husband was away on a hunting trip, and some of the males were still in camp to protect the women and children, and Fierce Bear is over looking at her in her loincloth and kind of watching her move through camp and starting to get ideas, so Morning Sun was a good partner because she was a better gatherer. She could feed the family better. She had the herbs for the herbalists, but she also had less males hitting on her, which strengthened the union of her with her own man.
Yeah.
So we have things like that go way back, and nobody understood that.
Yeah.
Most people today don't.
Right. Yeah.
Perfume, where did that word come from? When you burn something, the smoke rises, and in virtually every religion, he, she, it, God, lives up there in the sky somewhere, and is God really so omnipresent that he, she, it can see you and I here right now talking, and whether or not you have a sore toe? I have trouble buying that.
Right.
That's a little too much data for me to
Right.
I don't think the cloud has room for that much data. But so what can we do to get God's attention? Maybe if we all get together and make some noise, maybe he, she will hear us. Oh, let's build a temple and sing.
Right.
Or let's beat drums.
Yeah.
And let's burn some of this stuff here, because it's very aromatic, and smoke rises. Maybe God will smell us. So in Latin, parfumum means through smoke.
Right.
So the traditional use of incense, for example, in temples, was to get God's attention. So the Egyptians, who believed that the sun was a god because it gave us life, all the plant photosynthesis and everything else, and the sun was going by, so that must be, so they called him Ra. And when the sun was straight overhead in the middle of the day, when he was at greatest power, and we want him to come back and see us, we all got around the temple and we light up incense at great expense to as a taxpayer, expensive incense, and we send clouds of it coming from the temple, perhaps chanting as well, and we're going, Ra, because that was his name, Ra, 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 Ra. And now we do that at football games.
Right.
So many old traditions have been completely...
shifted and... Don't even get us started on, Christmas and that whole thing, Santa. And
oh, gosh.
twist of that. But, and, perfume, that, through smoke, it's definitely even, like a mystical experience, right? Like you burn something and all these aromatics are released, and then you see even the idea of like breathing in or breathing out smoke, to make the invisible visible. Like that's a pretty cool,
So, parfumum, through smoke we see God, we talk to God.
Yeah.
And now we use it to enhance our sexuality.
Right. Yeah. And we're trying to the pheromones that you talked about as well. We're trying to give off a certain scent and, attract.
And originally, unwittingly, they were used to mask or disguise
the
femininity. Now we use it to enhance, we hope.
Yeah.
You're going out on a big date or something, you put on some perfume.
Yeah, but I know I'm not the only one. Anybody who's kind of, more naturalized, like you smell like chemical perfume and it's like instant turn off. It's like, okay, not that, not that person. And I know, birth control is actually another one that's really messed a lot of people up in terms of their kind of sense abilities that you don't even realize it. I heard one study that a woman on birth control will actually have trouble deciphering, the natural pheromones to be attracted to the right partner. Her ability to sense that is actually greatly inhibited. And it's these like deep chemical cues that we're just unconscious to most of the time that really help us like successfully navigate the world, and things like finding the right partner. And birth control can really mess women up on that level where you start dating the wrong guy for the wrong reasons because you're not cluing in to those chemical cues.
Yes.
Is there a synergy? Is there a match here? And
yeah. All of a sudden we're talking about aromachemistry now.
Right.
Look at us go.
Endocrine disruptors. And
But, and that's an area that I've studied a lot, for sure, becoming an instructor myself eventually.
yeah.
It's quite amazing, like, a female mouse can have little mices in her body that are almost ready to be born. They already have hair and nails.
Right.
And if she goes out for any reason whatsoever and smells the pee of another male too close to her den, she'll actually, knowing that if she births the baby mice, he will eat them to force her into, I guess the right word is estrus, I think,
Right.
faster so that he can have her way with her, so that he'll
Right.
have his children instead of the other guys.
Yeah.
So rather than let that happen, she has the ability to actually reabsorb, literally digest, through her uterine lining, every cell
Wow.
of the baby mice. She digests them and says, I'm not going to let that creep get my babies. I'll just eat them myself.
Right.
Like,
Wow.
it's just,
Unbelievable. Yeah.
really? It's quite astonishing where we
Yeah.
fit or don't fit into the natural world.
Yeah, which is why I've always, not necessarily kind of been raised in, a bit of the middle, a little bit more in kind of like conventional, chemical, commercial type of lifestyle, but always having like a rooting, a grounding in things more natural. The more I learn, the more I just keep tending towards, nature and not messing with that, trying to, lean to more, the natural, because, we create something isolated, chemical, synthetic, and don't know the repercussions of where that's going to throw one off.
I remember I just had a flash of, as a very little boy, watching my mother water her houseplants and be talking to them
Right.
while she was watering plants. And I, in my little, 3 or 4 year old head, would sit there and wonder if my mother was crazy or something, thinking, maybe that's okay, but do they actually talk back?
Right.
And if they do, does mom need to go to a special hospital for that?
Yeah.
And all these years later, I'm studying more about plant-spirit communication.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's one of those things that it's like a new door opening in a wall where you'd never noticed that pink door before. Oh, has it always been there? And you go open the door and there's a whole world.
Yeah.
So you have like seeing auras. If with somebody's guidance you realize you can actually do that, it doesn't mean you have to walk around all day confused by other people's auras. You can kind of just open the door when you want to.
Yeah.
But, there's all of those little skills that can be very helpful. And I had several memories through my life where plants had attempted to talk to me, but through training, I suppose, I had been taught that that's just not possible.
Right.
So just a little shift back to auras. I believe that all young children can see auras, that we kind of train them out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so if one of your young children has come up and say, "Oh, Mommy, you have such nice green hair today." No, that's a shift in her aura.
Right, yeah.
Right? And you say, "No, dear, I'm blonde. I have yellow hair."
Yeah.
Oh, right?
Right.
We kind of coach them out of those gifts.
Yeah, what Stephen Buhner calls it the metaphysical background of the earth. You know, like it's there, and it's just a perceptual thing to access it. And some people, you know, it comes more auditory, some visual. I think we have an ability to, all of us, perceive all of it. Sometimes we're more inclined, you know, through one sense gateway or another, or doorway, as you mentioned it. I think the ultimate one for me, I feel, is like more like a feeling sense, you know, not, okay, is this hot or cold, but the feeling sense of like, feels pretty good. You know, you meet someone for the first time, you get a good, like, energetic about them. That is the one that I feel the most connected to, and I think is foundational, that we can each tap into. But like you say, it's kind of our modern conventional society that, you know, through all the reasons we could go through and all the kind of historical references, that has really been, you know, phased out, trained out, or, you know, seen as like, oh, well, something's wrong with that person. Or, you know, how many people do we have in psych institutes that are actually fine? They just have these gating channels that are really open in one way or another. Misunderstood, yeah. And I mean, that's been a problem, you know, throughout all societies for a long time, right? When so and so down the road is seeing things and nobody else is seeing it. They're the crazy ones. We better, you know, we don't understand it. We better lock them away. They're hearing voices. They're this and that.
Or they're getting something in their diet, like ergot of rye.
Yeah.
Shifting gears yet again. There's a little fungus, a group called ergots, that in particular grows on wild rye. You'll see it almost looks a bit like the head of cattails. It's virtually black, but it's just on the top of the plant. It'll be coating the seed head. There's several seeds there, and you got this little black coating. And among other things, it contains, what is it, lysergic something, I forget the proper name for LSD.
LSD,
but it contains acid. It's got LSD in it. And so in little cultures where, like New England villages, for example, people were sort of doing a lot of things cooperatively, and maybe you had a good crop of something and mine failed or whatever. Come fall, people would maybe share a lot of their grains to make granola for the whole village or whatever. And none of them realizing that the whole village is taking LSD regularly, every morning for breakfast. You know, so somebody visiting, I mean, watch out! Well, careful, Malcolm. One might bite you. And an outsider would look at them like, "Whoa! Everybody here is completely off the wall.
Yeah.
They must be under a spell." And, you know, there's that odd woman that lives alone out past the edge of town near the swamp there. And remember when we put too much flour on the back of the wagon one day and the axle broke and fell on little Jimmy's leg? Surely the bones were crushed. He would have never walked again. But she took care of him, and he's over there now working in the garden or flying a kite. She must have she's got some sort of power that we don't understand. It must be her. Somebody must have angered her, put a spell on the whole village. Oh, yeah, we better burn her.
Yeah.
Well, we'll try and drown her first, and if she doesn't drown, then we'll burn her.
Yeah.
So there's so many people that were tried for witchcraft over a fungus growing in their fields.
Yeah. Yeah.
And or things, old legends coming from Europe with a lot of those cultures about like vampirism
Right.
and werewolves and things like that. So we've had a moist summer, which favors a lot of fungus, and everybody in town's pretty freaking high on this ergot. And a group of us are sitting out on maybe your front porch having some tea, or maybe some mead. And neighbor Jim from a block over, he's been out elk hunting for a few days, managed to bag one. So it happens to be a full moon night, or we wouldn't even seen him go by on the street there. But the moon was full and bright, and there's a few of us have been having chickens killed lately, and there's something attacking our livestock. And look, there goes Jim, and he's been out hunting for 2 weeks, so he's got a beard on him, and there's blood all over his clothes, and maybe it was one of our own dogs started howling for some reason, and we wouldn't have seen him if the moon wasn't full. He must be one of them there werewolves.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was really because the witnesses were higher than a kite.
Yeah.
You know, so all sorts of cultural phenomena that come from
Yeah.
toxicity, you know. Or I'm sure you've heard me speak about my baneberry experience.
Yeah.
When I was quite young.
Yeah.
This was at Waskesiu Lake, I think, a picnic, and I just probably went to pee nearby in the forest, and there was this clump of berries. It's what's called a raceme, where each berry is about maybe that tall, and there's a clump of them about that round and this high, and they're right at eye level for a 3 or 4 year old. As few as 8 berries have killed young children. And so you get this big clump of shiny red berries right at eye level, and it's as if there's a sign there saying, "Pick me." And I was literally just reaching. I was going to eat those berries. I was reaching for the berries, and I heard this voice. You wouldn't have heard it beside me probably, but it was in my mind or something, and it was, "What are you doing there, you little whippersnapper?" Well, I was going to eat your berries. Isn't that okay? Well, do my berries remind you of something? Well, kind of like the plastic fruit on Grandma's coffee table in that crystal bowl there. Well, would you eat those? Would you eat that plastic fruit? See how shiny my berries are? Don't they look a little bit perfect? Too perfect? Well, yeah, okay. Oh, you better just run along now. You know, and I always thought that was some sort of hallucination that couldn't have happened. Mm-hmm. But as I learned more about plant-spirit communication, I realized that did happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and so I had all sorts of memories. I got very close to, they're so stunningly beautiful, right on my brother's property and the immediate surrounding forest. There's a lot of pink lady slipper growing.
Right.
And they're so beautiful that I had to always kind of stop and sit with them just to admire them. I might photograph them later in my life, and I would just sit there before I understood that I was meditating with them. And I might come when I first saw them in usually about the first week of June, they're in bloom. And I say, "Oh, and you have a whole bunch of new grandchildren." And I wouldn't speak to them with my voice. I was speaking with my mind. I was thinking with them. Mm-hmm. However that works. You've had a very good winter, haven't you? You have all these new grandchildren, you know. And I would lay there with them and absorb their energy. So anyway, one day I'm on my way down to the beach to have a swim, and there happened to be a 4-leaf clover growing right there. And my wife's birthday was at the end of June, and one of the lady slippers tried to say, hey Blaine, look at there's a 4-leaf clover here that you could put that in Jennifer's birthday card and with something cute. She'd really like that. And I didn't hear a thing. I went swimming, came back, and the next time I was going down to the beach, they were like, "Hey, thickhead, would you notice this? There's a 4-leaf clover here. Jennifer would like that." It took 3 pass-bys before I was kind of like, "Oh, look,
Yeah.
there's a 4-leaf clover here." And all these flowers were going, duh.
Yeah.
This guy was a bit hard to catch.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know? But I suddenly, I realized they'd been trying to tell me for several days now.
Yeah.
I wasn't receiving it. But having opened that door a few times, it's not like every plant, I don't know, this plant over here isn't telling stories about me or talking. I don't know what your bush is saying.
Yeah.
It's not like it's a wide open, it gets noisy at times.
Yeah.
But it's happened many times since because it happened once.
Yeah. No, it's cool.
You
So
know?
that'd be an interesting thing to explore. Like, how does one first have an experience like that, or if they've even had it once, like, how do you cultivate that to happen more frequently? And, like, one thing I think about, we talked about, is just like, if you have grandchildren, if you have children, how can you facilitate that without always automatically like, no, you're just imagining things, little Johnny, like shutting it down for them.
Yeah.
You can do that for your kids. I think this is where, as you say, it's something like entheogens play a role. It's like they open up those sensory gating channels because, we don't want noise in our everyday life of like the plant's talking to us, this and that, like all this input coming in like that.
You would never be able to put in a day's work.
That metaphysical background of the earth, like it's something to tap into. And if you can selectively, like, at the right time, open up those sensory gating channels, like to receive that, that's a beautiful thing. And that's where I come back to, okay, sure, entheogens, but really it's just the practice of being quiet, being still in nature, meditation, within oneself, like observations. And then it also takes like, whenever we have those little voices, even if it's something like, don't turn right, like go another way today, like that type of thing, we'll get those just subtle, the more we can kind of listen to that. And
the old expression of a gut feeling.
Yeah.
There's more neurons in your intestines than there are in your brain. And we just completely dismiss that. Oh, that's just a place where poop comes out eventually. No, a gut feeling should be really respected.
Yeah.
And you talk to people sometimes, like I had one friend after he'd retired with the RCMP about they were making a regular stop and he had a really strong gut feeling that something was wrong here and turned sideways just in time to see his partner's head explode because the guy they'd stopped had pulled a sawed-off 12-gauge out of the trunk.
Right.
He had a gut feeling and didn't act on it.
Right.
And that's haunted him forever.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and not, unfortunately, sometimes, you learn the most from those, I should have listened to it, like, I got the message, I didn't, like Yarrow, he often talks about that being a crime against wisdom, like when you've had the message, you've gotten it, but yet you still, and that would be more in the case of like habits or patterns where it's like, how many times do I have to tell you, internally, it's time to shift, it's time to change, but you don't, and that can be something that, can decrease, I think, your ability to be open to receiving that. And so, we gotta listen and act.
Sometimes, back to entheogens, we use an outside agent to allow us to maybe open a door for the first time.
Yeah.
But sometimes, just thinking about your words here, sometimes it just takes being really still.
Mm-hmm.
When was the last time you were really still? I can hear the furnace running in the background. you know, things like that. You just, when do you, and that's the beauty of sitting on a stump in the forest
Yeah.
on a morning like this,
Yeah.
to just be at one with the snowflakes, maybe having been taught that every one of them is unique. And tens of thousands are falling
Yeah.
just between here and your car.
Yeah.
How can there be that much uniqueness
Yeah.
on our planet?
Yeah, I know the challenge for most people, myself included, is like, even if you do physically slow down, get into that stillness, then, you know, the mind is right. Oh, okay, I got that thing to do, and oh my gosh, I really wish I hadn't have done that yesterday, and da 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 da. The mind just takes over, and that's sometimes where you need that. Yeah, like you say, that like concentration, that focus, that reflection on nature. If you don't, you know, there's all kinds of techniques, you know, to, okay, watch the breath, concentrate on that, but you know, the mind wanders. So yeah, observation of nature, contemplation. I know some herbal practices, like to connect with plants, it's like drawing them, getting into the intricacy. Like as kids, like I was just watching my son the other day, like we went off on a little bike ride, we stopped for a little snack, and like, you know, he loves to splash, you know, it's springtime, it's puddles, it's this and that, and it was just like, it was splashing, and then all of a sudden he got so enraptured in just like, you know, the flow of, you know, from one puddle down through this little stream to the next. It was all filling in, and he was just like lost in that total world. Like, that's it, that's the magic, you know. Yeah, cultivating that so that you can get to the point where you don't have to be physically still. You can, you know, I think this is one of the goals of like the great yogis and the meditators. It's like, you know, to be in the world, you can still, you know, go about, function. It doesn't, you know, like what's your meditation, you know, off the mat. Like, it's great, you're sitting, you're practicing, you're doing your yoga, but once you get up and engage in the world, how can you maintain that level of awareness, that level of awe, that level of, you know, sensory gating, like being opened up?
Mentioning your son, I just had a flashback that's never flashed before.
No.
About being about that age.
Yeah.
And building a little wooden boat out of some popsicle sticks and having to put it in one of those little streams to see how far it could go.
Right. Cool.
You know, and maybe it would make it to the end of the street or whatever. But
yeah, and you know, being a parent and seeing, you know, from children to grandparents, like I think that's one of the magical things about being a grandparent is you're in that phase of life that you can slow down again, that you, man, you just so much appreciate your grandkids, like, and children in general. Like, you can slow down, you can get down to their level, whereas I know as a parent it's like, okay, well, we got to make sure we are at home at this time and lunch and da 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 and the rest of my day. And it's like grandparents, they don't have any of that. They can just like slow down, zone in, like, yeah, let's watch that, let's build that little, you know, in that whole magic. And that's really what life is about.
when I separated from culture to live alone in the woods for a few months, it was many weeks before the general day-to-day garbage left my head.
Right.
I didn't know anything about meditating back then. I don't know much now. But there's just all of that day-to-day stuff. It isn't toxic. You don't have to be angry. It's just stuff. It's just the way you dry yourself with a towel, the way you go the same way to work every day. Try going to work a different way and see how good it feels to get lost.
Right.
You know?
Create some new neural pathways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of like science now about when you do that, when you get to that, if you do something that really takes you out of your comfort zone, like it stretches you to like, I did it, and you get that exhilaration, you know, like it literally changes your brain, which can change your life, you know, but it's got to be that that new experience. Because even if you do the same thing, okay, that was awesome, you know, you get similar, it kind of gets less and less, the kind of the potency and the effect. It's really comes from, yeah.
And it can be so powerful that you'll want to share that with other people so much that you actually describe it on a business card.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love entrepreneurship in that way.
I've met a few people at our little get-togethers that you've been having at the shop.
Yeah.
Methodologies I've never heard of before.
For sure. Yeah.
But felt some really good energy coming from the person.
Right.
You know? So.
Yeah.
Oh, really? That's you do that for a living?
Right.
Oh, I wanna come and experience that.
Yeah. Cool. All right, well, we're going to wrap it there. Just over an hour. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. It's good times. All those things. Give it a like, give it a share. Post any comments, any questions down below. We'll be back again soon for another chat. Bye for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to give us a like, share this with someone you know who would benefit, and subscribe so you're up to date with all the new episodes coming out. You can shop online at lightcellar.ca as well as visit us in the heart of Bowness in Calgary, Alberta.